Hi everyone, can you folks hear me okay in the back? Excellent, front's got it, back's got it. I will say once more that we have 3 seats right in the very front if you want to sit down. Perfect, excellent, a volunteer. Thank you. You're the hero tonight. You really are. Thank you. Oh, awesome, amazing, so good. Yeah, I promise this is not science class. We're not going to call on you. You can sit in the front row. It's okay? Okay, excellent. Thank you. Because why stand should you not need to? Hi, everyone. Welcome. Thank you so kindly for joining us. I'm Car Johnson. I'm the event coordinator for Green Apple, and I am delighted beyond measure to welcome tonight Paul Yamazaki for the release. We're celebrating his book, Reading the Room, A Bookseller's Tale. Let's give one more hand for the bookseller. I don't think that I can say concisely what Paul means to our industry and to our city, so I will not try. But I will say that if attendance here is reflective of the impact that he has had on our industry and our city, then take a look around you. We're surrounded by friends and book people, and that's pretty cool. Pretty cool. I'm very happy to be in the same industry and the same city as Paul Yamazaki. So, yeah. Speaking of people, I am happy to be in the same industry and city as Paul is joined tonight by Vanessa Martini. City Lights alum and current Green Apple buyer, Vanessa Martini. We're going to hear these two very shortly. I have very brief business before we get to the heart of the evening. Now is a good time to silence your cell phones if you have not already. I think picture taking is fine. Picture taking is fine. Just don't take a call in the middle of the event. That's not appropriate. Don't do that. Please do check out our full event calendar on Green Apple's website. If you are interested in events such as the one you are currently attending, you might like what else we have in store for you in the coming season. The restroom is behind me. It is available after the event and not during the event for obvious reasons. If you need to know how to get there, do ask me and I will gladly tell you. We have copies of Reading the Room available at the front register. You can find them there. If you've been here before, you have certainly heard me say that when you buy books from us, not only do you support us as an independent bookstore, you support writers who put so much work into making this book. You also support Ode Books, who published this book, and you also get to have a book at the end of it, which might be the best part. So if you are able, we always appreciate it. Thank you so kindly. Without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and introduce the two folks who are joining us tonight. First, Vanessa Martini is head buyer at Green Apple Books. She previously worked at City Lights alongside Paul Yamazaki, from whom she learned the value of conversation, curiosity, and a cold drink. She lives in San Francisco with her cat, PJ. Let's give one more hand for Vanessa Martini. And last but most certainly not least, Paul Yamazaki has been the principal buyer at City Lights Booksellers, the legendary San Francisco bookstore and publisher founded by Lawrence Ferlinghetti and Peter Martin for more than 50 years. A champion for national and global literature, writers, publishers, and independent bookstores, Yamazaki was the recipient of the National Book Foundation's 2023 Literarian Award for Outstanding Service to the American literary community. He has mentored generations of booksellers across the U.S. His book, Reading the Room, is the reason we are here tonight. Let's give one more hand for Paul Yamazaki.
Hi, everyone. Just to get a quick read on the room, as it were, how many of you guys are in books? Can you raise your hands? Thank you. How many of you aren't in books? How many of you are my family? Thank you all for coming. It means a lot to both of us to see you here. I thought we would just kind of have a freewheeling conversation as we tend to do. Doesn't really matter if you read the book or not. I think you can kind of find your way through this, as Paul likes to talk about. I thought I would start with, you describe your scoutmaster, Mr. Gilbert.
Yes.
In a specific way that then reminded me of a certain way you described Lawrence Ferlinghetti. You talked about how both of them gave you a map and then let you prove yourself with it and then let you fly.
Well, I think that's a really astute reading of both our conversations and reading the book. So Mr. Gilbert was my scoutmaster. I was a Boy Scout for 5 years, maybe even longer. And that's but why I talk about that so much is because it really gave me a sense of independence, because Mr. Gilbert was really believed very strongly in like giving us a foundation that we can make our own independent judgments. And so in Boy Scouts, that led to that we would take these long walks, like 110, 115 miles, and he felt enough confidence in us because of his teaching methods that we could walk large stretches of that by ourselves. And we'd meet a couple times a day, and Lawrence, very similarly, and I think that's very astute of you to kind of pick up both of those things, had a very similar way of like, once he felt that we were moving in the same direction at City Lights, that he gave us a huge amount of independence. And so that meant that we didn't always agree on things, and we would talk those things out. And but I think those were really foundational points in both cases.
Do you feel like you had a wayfinding in mind when you took over buying at City Lights, or no?
Oh, I had no idea. So, I mean, this is the great thing about, like, there's so many of us here from the book community, and one of the things about the Bay Area book community is that it really is exactly that. And I think one of the advantages that Vanessa and I have, and booksellers and book people in the room who talk to book people around the country, is that one of the things that makes us very special here in the Bay Area is that we are a community, that there's a lot of us in the same thing. So our friends in Texas or Mississippi or in Missouri, they have to travel hours to have a gathering like we're having tonight. And so sometimes we take that for granted, or I've taken that for granted in the past. But for me as a bookseller is really, because I had no idea what I was doing. It was the reps who really kind of guided me through those early years, and they told me and pointed me to the booksellers I should be talking to. And so one of the people I would like to remember tonight is Nick Setka from Cody's Books. Nick, yes. Nick was so generous with his time to take a bookseller who had no idea what he was doing as a buyer, and spent hours with me, just kind of like giving me a general sense of what directions I should be taking or what I should be looking for.
Would you say that's been a model for how you are in the industry now?
Oh, very much so. The generosity. I mean, there's a lot of things that I'm critical about of what we do here as a book industry, but one of the things that is such a blessing for all of us in the book business is its generosity, that there is no question, there's no door that I've kind of knocked on where I've ever been turned away, and it's been astounding and very productive. And I think that's one of the things one of the reasons that Vanessa and I became friends and colleagues is that she was working as a fill-in, correct, at City Lights. And so when this store was in the process of being formation, Stephen Sparks told me, oh, I'm going to hire this person that's working for you, Vanessa Martini. I hadn't known her name. I says, what? Who? And I went to Andy the next day, says, like, Vanessa Martini. She says, oh yeah, she's a good fill-in person. Well, Sparks wants to hire her. We should hire her before that. So, thank you guys very much.
I think I would say, and I've said it to you, but I'd like to say it on a microphone in front of many people here, the greatest part about learning from you and working closely beside you is seeing the way that you have time for everybody and it comes from a genuine place of curiosity and receptivity and generosity, that your understanding of when you walk into a room and see the booksellers there, you're not making a kind of judgment of, oh, this is the person to talk to, I don't need to talk to this person. If somebody's interested in books, you want to talk to them. And that's always been the greatest lesson that I've had from you, and something that has been far and away, more than any kinds of ins and outs of buying, the greatest thing that I've learned working alongside you. And I'd like to talk a little bit about the people who kind of modeled that for you. So Nick Zetka and maybe Maggie, who was the rep who gave you Edward Said's Orientalism. If you could talk a little bit about her.
So Maggie Castillon was a Random House rep. So this would have to be in the late 70s. And Maggie was a woman of color. She's a woman. And in those days, publishing in general, but in New York and specifically, was an incredibly male-dominated enterprise. And but her close reading of everything. So how Orientalism came into my hands, I basically was not a bookseller. I was a reader who worked in a bookstore. And I closed the store like on Friday, Saturday nights at 2 a.m. And occasionally I would do fill-in shifts in the daytime. And so I happened to be working there. Maggie came in to have an appointment with our buyer at the time. And she had a 2-minute conversation with me. And 2 weeks later, this package arrives in there with my name on it. And in those 2 minutes, she really kind of understood not where I was at, but where I could possibly go. And so she sent a copy of Orientalism. And so that was a foundational book for me. And it just shows you how generosity and listening does. And I've been told that I don't listen that well, but it's... But it is, I have tried to kind of listen and be generous over the years. That was really adorable. So also another of Maggie's colleagues at that time was Ron Smith. And so Ron had just been elevated. So in those days, there was mass market reps and there was trade reps. And Ron had just come from mass market to trade. But he kind of understood that I was really curious about this stuff, and he understood the question that I always ask, still ask. If I see a book in my hands that I really like, I ask, starting with the reps, how did this book get here? And that often is the acquiring editor. And Ron understood that. My first trip to New York as a bookseller, as a buyer, was like, I spent 2.5 days at Random House talking to people at Vintage, talking to people at Pantheon. And it's one of the elements of our business, our world as book people, is like, those young editors at that time matriculated into being really senior people at Knopf and all the rest of the things. And it's, so that simple question can lead to decades of conversation.
In your answer, you said something I'd also like to follow a little bit. Not where you were, but where you could be. And I think that the two of us as buyers were frequently looking at the kind of audience that we have and thinking, how can I push the boat out for the customers a little bit? How can I build the trust to bring in a book that might be outside of their comfort zone, but they trust us enough to take a chance on it? Can you talk a little bit about that process?
I think you just hit the absolute key word, and that word is trust. And so I have the privilege of being at City Lights that has this iconoclastic history, and so what I've been able to do there and using that trust is that we don't have to think about audience or what market we're trying to fill. So over the decades, we have developed within the people who come through the doors of City Lights and our staff, that this absolute trust that the books that we bring in are kind of worthy of exploration, and so we've been rewarded all that time. And the thing that we as booksellers have that our writer friends, our editor and publisher friends don't have is that we get rewarded every day, because when we see somebody who comes into the store, picks up a book that they hadn't expected to find, that they came in for one thing, and hopefully we had that one thing, but they also find these 2 or other 3 things. That's really rewarding. And
I've been looking for this book forever, and you're the first store that's had it. Or they come in, they're like, I've never seen this anywhere, so I have to get it. That's always the most exciting.
It is.
Can you talk a little bit about how some of the discussions maybe interest staff at City Lights about what is or isn't carried? Because sometimes that can be a fraught situation.
It's part of it is just numbers. It doesn't matter whether we're 60,000 square feet or 500 square feet of retail space, is that whether we're Powell's or we're 3 Lives, that we're always going to have space issues. And so decisions will always have to be made about like what we're going to make available or not. And City Lights is 80% backlist,
For those who aren't book people, that means older books we're ordering again.
That gives us a level of stability. But even within so-called older books, we're always shifting kind of sightlines of who we're going to carry or what we're going to emphasize. So I could probably sell like author X 5 copies, but we'll only order 1 copy because we want to be able to bring out authors that may not be as well known. So like there's one particular section right now that this is simply by alphabetical chance, but Julie Otsuka, Helen Oyemi, and Ozeki. So those are 3 incredible women writers that we can feature and bring out. And so does that mean we're carrying less polynote? Yes, but you have to give space and you have to make these decisions. It's one of the interesting things. So that's always changing. We're trying to change our sight lines in terms of what the regular customers will and what we're going to feature to the variety of different people.
Something you and I have talked about quite a bit is how it's difficult to figure out an epistemology of book selling and how there isn't really a kind of passed down knowledge in the way of making this kind of decision. And it doesn't currently exist for City Lights, it doesn't currently exist for Green Apple, it doesn't currently exist for the industry as a whole. And can you talk about maybe some ideas you have about developing an epistemology to talk with incoming booksellers who want to learn about making this kind of choice?
Well, this is the portion of the conversation where we'll hear the chairs scraping and people fleeing out to the bars to have a drink. Because part of this is really, so what we do at City Lights is that we measure every shelf, every section, so we know how many linear feet there are in every section. And
Get away from the linear feet.
So but that's, you're talking about epistemology. That's exactly what that is. But so you have a sense of what you could be expecting in terms of sales per those feet. But what we found, and this is why you measure, is that you can make these aesthetic judgments and they may seem wildly crazy, like, okay, we're going to spend 2 months in the middle of summer and not carry Steinbeck in California. That seems nuts. But I can tell you, because I have these measurements, because we're able to bring authors in and feature them that people don't expect to see, but because, and there again we go back to trust, because they trust us, that our production per square feet in those areas is as good or as higher. And so that's epistemology.
Something I've heard you say is the buyer takes the reader into a room they hadn't expected to walk into. Can you expand on that a little bit?
Yeah, that's probably after my 3rd scotch. So, but it is like when we as booksellers go through catalogs and are exploring new things, and we're talking with our reps, and we're in areas that we didn't quite know, and so it is kind of trusting ourselves and trusting the reader to kind of open that door, walk through it, and just kind of and know that you don't know and be fine with that.
There is a kind of mutual relation. There's a mutual relationship between the buyer and the rep. And if you were at the Kaliba Spring Forum, you heard me say this already, but I'll say it again. Where you as the buyer, you're bringing what you know of your store. The rep is bringing what they know of their catalog. If you are in the book industry, a sales rep is coming from a publishing house. They have a catalog of books that they are bringing to us. And one of our great reps said, in the call with you, I work for you. I don't work for the publisher. And it's a mutual conversation where we are developing a relationship through the list. And we're defending our decisions. They're explaining how they think the book can be in our store. Just to explain a little background of what a rep is for us. But I guess I would say I have started to develop a much more nuanced understanding of my role as buyer, and part of it is translating New York and publishing and reps and all this kind of very brass tacks and also very business-minded side for the booksellers that are on the floor. And it's my job to be a conduit of the big catalogs, of the big lists, of the get 25 for six copies, get this for that, get your signed copies, get your comp for this, get your promo for this, get your co-op, and explaining that to the people on the floor in terms of here's how you can engage with it, here's who the person that brought this book to you is. And that I think has come a lot from working with you and seeing the way that you have tried to translate these vast and frequently more and more visually flattened catalogs and trying to explain to people the differences between a book from Knopf and a book from New Directions. And can you talk a little bit about how you developed your own kind of understanding of your role as buyer in between New York and the floor of City Lights?
That's a really difficult question right now where, for me personally, I'm working mostly from home these days, but the big hard transition for myself personally is going from print catalogs where a New Directions catalog or a Knopf catalog or a Farrar catalog or a University of California catalog was kind of a pleasurable read that you could do on the couch in the evenings. We are now working with these digital catalogs that have a lot of positive qualities, but one of the things they're not is that they're not graphically or visually arresting. One of the elements of the traditional print catalogs that every publishing house had its own distinctive visual style and how they would point us as the readers towards those specific titles that they were interested in. And then it was also for us as individual buyers is to also penetrate beyond the graphic things, is to really understand how a particular book would fit into our particular stores. But it is the challenge now, I think, that for all of us in bookstores, that we could spend the rest of the evening talking about how do we transmit those ideas now that we don't have the print catalog and there's now these digital catalogs, and to get that information out to our staffs. And so when you have good ideas, please let me know because seriously, it's one of the things that we're talking about at City Lights right now is how to do this and how to revive that tradition that City Lights has had for the last 40 years to have the whole staff involved in the selection of titles.
It's a lot of information. It's a lot to ask people who are already doing a bunch of often extremely physical work. If you're not accustomed to book selling work, it's a lot more physical than you think. A lot of customer facing, it's a lot of energy taken from you. And then to ask to scroll through the screen where everything looks the same. It's not always easy to do, and it's very easy to lose the kind of nuances of what makes a certain imprint different from others. And so I've been trying as best that I can to at least starting with being available. Like, you can come and ask me always the question of how did this book get into my hands? I really like this. Who is the editor? Who did this? Who did that? But it's an ongoing process, and one that I don't think will ever be perfect, but we can aspire to better all the time. That also reminds me of another great quote of yours that I really liked, which was, compromise doesn't have to mean you lose the horizon. And I'd like you to talk a little bit about that in terms of your history in politics and activism, and also in your work as buyer at City Lights.
Compromise is a political necessity. So having done a lot of work over the decades of trying to understand the immediacy of need that people have at the moment, and understanding that what we're trying to address the immediate need is also not going to address the long-term inequity. And so when we look at the book business, we look about race and class, starting in our own stores, all the way up to the big corporate houses. But it is something that's an issue at every level of the book business, and of like who's able to participate, who can afford economically to participate. So it's not just a race issue, it's an economic and class issue. That's a large, big problem. You're not going to be able to leap over that at one point. So certain levels of, to continue that conversation, you have to give a little. You're in these various rooms, both. I've had the good fortune of working both in DC and New York, talking about these various issues, trying to move them forward. One of the most heartening things about compromise is that, for me, as just political realism, is I love having people on my left, and so it's like I look like the reasonable one. And so for many years I didn't have that. I was out there kind of like raising these issues, but one of the why I'm so optimistic in general is not only because of the books and the writing that we have, but the fact that there are so many people that we've developed a whole cohort in the last 10 years, your generation essentially, of these really intelligent, challenging booksellers who continue to bring these issues up, and I'm happy to be the old man and the compromiser in this situation.
Can you talk maybe a little bit about your past history of activism? I think that's a fascinating chapter of your life, and continues to this day.
So, I'm 75 now. I was really very fortunate to come to San Francisco in the late summer of 1967. And so for those of us who are old enough to remember back at that time, like 67 in San Francisco in particular was like a period of tremendous transformation and change on all levels. And it was like within the literature, within the music, and for me, most particularly within the politics. And I came from a very suburban, middle-class background. My family had been traumatized by the concentration camps during the Second World War. My mother in particular had, part of that trauma for her was to try to raise us in this incredibly assimilationist way. And so I think a way to think about that is I didn't learn how to use chopsticks until I was 10. And so, like, in an Asian American household, that was kind of astounding, kind of an extreme form of assimilation. But that's how deeply my mother had been scarred by this experience. So coming here into the Bay Area, where like I was meeting activists of all stripes from a lot of backgrounds, but the thing that was so fortunate to me, and I don't think that younger activists today have quite the same access, is I was within a very short period of time talking to 3 generations of people who had started doing work in the 1920s and the 30s and the 40s. I was talking to people in the Abraham Lincoln Brigade. I've been talking to people who have been on Freedom Summers, who weren't actually chronologically that much older than me, but had a wealth of really practical experience and have been doing work here in the communities in the Bay Area, particularly in the communities of color, whether in the Bayview or in Chinatown or in the Mission. So I was very fortunate that way, but one of those people was Francis Oka, who also worked at City Lights, and through my activism, I was incarcerated for several months in county jail. I was sentenced to 2 concurrent 6 months sentences, and to get out earlier, I needed somebody who would say they would employ me. And so Francis went to Lawrence Ferlinghetti and Shug Morrow and Bob McBride, who was the manager at that time, to explain my situation. And so they hired me sight unseen. I don't think Lawrence anticipated, I certainly didn't anticipate that I would be there 54 years later.
I did want to talk a little bit about Lawrence and Nancy in particular. I feel like Nancy is kind of the unsung unsung hero of City Lights and of therefore of book selling in San Francisco. If you could unpack her role a little bit.
So Nancy Peters, I had the great fortune of working with for many decades. She was the first director of City Lights, so Lawrence never considered he was the founder, but it was Nancy who really kind of understood not just the importance of City Lights and Lawrence's and Peter Martin and Shig's original vision for City Lights, but that it was important to sustain that thing, that it was important not to have City Lights be kind of an anecdote of history and to kind of to create a sustaining institution. So she laid the foundation for us to be here 71 years later. And so how did she do that? One, to be able to understand us as an institution, that we weren't strictly a site of literary production, to be cited to do all this work in books and in literature, that we had to be ongoing, we had to be sustainable, and I was able to follow her path of, because none of us knew anything about business at that time, but she said that we had to learn how to become a business, and I took that really seriously. And I had this, one of the stories that's not in the book, I used to hang out and run into this young father at that time, and he was able to make a living with his young child by playing the ponies. He'd go to Golden Gate Fields, he did this. We would talk about that, and we weren't friends, but we'd run into each other occasionally. And so the first time we had to talk about this, he had these graph papers, and he would be able to cite the horses, and he had the conditions of every racetrack that he had. And so he was able to have this chart. And I ran into him a couple years later, and he showed me very excitedly this huge kind of thing that looked like a Singer-Sower machine. It was like an early portable computer, and he had a spreadsheet on that. He had converted all these things onto an early version of Excel.
Is that where you learned to be really into spreadsheets?
Yes. So, I mean, this was, as a young cat, this was like, had to be in about 85. He was making about 30K on the ponies.
So you're saying that being a buyer for a bookstore is pretty much the same as bidding on horses?
Well, there's that aspect, yes. There's a huge amount of chance in what we do, yes. If any of us in the book business knew what was going to work,
It's true.
yes. But you bring up the great point, is like, so in the book business today, it's like independent booksellers, if we could take somebody like, let's say, Tommy Orange, for example, at the end of 12 months, we'll probably be, independent bookstores will probably be 10% of market share, but it's my speculation that pre-sales, you know, particularly for Tommy's first book, they're there, in the first 30 to 60 days sales, that we'd be, what, 30 to 40% of total sales? Do you have a sense of that? More?
Yeah, more, yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
And so,
Tommy's sales rep.
certain people in New York recognize that about what we do as independent booksellers. And in large part, that's because what you transmit back to us, all our reps transmit back to New York. It's kind of our enthusiasms. And so that part of the dialogue, the reps are so crucial in kind of like setting a context for conversation, and that when we go to New York and we can have, it helps speed those conversations on. But it's part of the excitement and challenge of what we do, but not every book works that way, right? And sometimes it'll take years and many books to get to the authors where we think that potential is there. So like somebody like Alex Heyman who's an amazing writer. Still, commercially, from my point, hasn't reached his full readership. Just it's a book that's just coming out now, Blue Ruin by Hari Kundru, is like astounding. He's developed a track record, but Hari still is not where I think he should be in readership. It's Karen Yamashita over Coffee House is like who I consider one of the most significant writers in the 21st century in any language. Is still an independent publisher. Coffee House does a marvelous job, but I talk about Karen constantly because I think she needs to be more widely read than she currently is.
And yeah, that's an ongoing series of trust from us and the reps of guiding us to the right writer, trust in the writer on our part, and then the audience that we do have buying it, trusting us. Thank you for sharing. I think we're ready for audience questions. Come on, I know you guys.
This is a comment more than a question, but I really miss the catalogs, printed catalogs also, because I learned, especially from Paul, how to read upside down. Because all of the, not just the, other booksellers, numbers, but comments and things. And the conversation about bookselling has changed so much in our day to day. But it's a privilege to be able to still have those conversations with so many great buyers. So I just want to
Well, thank you. But I think, at least brings up a really important point, is that print, the paper page is still an amazing technology. And and I'm not trying to set up a binary opposition between a screen and the printed page, but in our particular case of having staff participation and having that conversation be more broadly cast, even if you have to read upside down, is I think the point. And so even if we're able to figure out how to do that digitally in these new digital catalogs, it will not be as much fun, and you can't read those things upside down.
Well, and reps, we got a better sense of the booksellers that way too, as well as conversations. So anyhow.
Matt, you had a question?
Yeah, I think you all touched on this a little bit throughout the conversation, but I'd love to hear more. Like, bookstores are so uniquely positioned. As a lapsed bookseller, I think about this a lot, and that's they are involved both in the consumption and production of knowledge simultaneously, depending on the market trends, but also the interests of the buyers, and a really big part in the place that you're in. And you all have both spoken so well about folks you wish had kind of had a higher platform, but I'd really love to hear from both of you, like, an example of a book or author where that you were involved in that production and actually did change maybe the arc of the book or spin ever so slightly.
If anybody couldn't hear, Matt wanted to hear about generally success stories we've had and where we've seen maybe our own effect on the success of a book.
I'm going to take a very easy one and say Percival Everett. So Percival, for over 3 decades, has been writing formally in so many different styles, dealing with so many different types of how he approaches a subject. The majority of those books have been published by Grey Wolf, and as great as a publisher as Grey Wolf is, that in general, that over that long decade and over those many, many books, that Percival Everett was nowhere close to earning a living as a writer. And it's in cooperation with Grey Wolf and Percival kind of, after many decades, was, looking to earn a little bit. And so, he consciously wrote something that was more commercial, found a great and appropriate publisher for it, and and I think James, as we all know, has been really kind of for me is somebody who is supported as a bookseller, Everett, and to see him now reach this kind of commercial success is really tremendous. Do I like James's as a like Erasure? I do not, but I am really so gratified to see this success.
I think broadly, I think any bookseller in this room could tell you when you put a shelf talker on a book, it'll sell much more than if that same book didn't have one. So I think anybody who's worked in books knows that and sees that effect. And if you've been a customer in any bookstore and have bought a book based on somebody's recommendation,
Yes.
that's exactly what's happening. I'll say for me, the book that I think I found the most gratifying that kept living on with my shelf talker on it was this book, also from Grey Wolf, called If an Egyptian Cannot Speak English by Noor Naga. It's formally challenging, it's uncomfortable at times, and it just kept going and going and going and still keeps going. And it's always, it just feels, not in a way that's like egoistic, it feels incredible when something that you had a really deep emotional reaction to, the audience there responds to it and buys it in the same way that you, the level at which you felt affected by it, they are responding to it commercially in raw terms of buying it. It feels amazing, it feels incredible, and honestly, I would say that being the buyer, you get to see that a bunch in minute ways because you're the one making the decisions about what is coming in, what's getting stacked, what's getting phased out. And it's hard to articulate. I'm trying to find the right way to describe it, but it's not an ego stroke to me when something that I thought was a book that needed some trust from the audience does well. To me, it's almost humbling to me to see something that is riskier, that is challenging in subject matter, that is expensive in price, possibly. It does well, and to me, it's like the people are there. The people want this kind of book. The people are responding to it in this way that I knew that they would, and that is so gratifying to me in a way that's incredibly humbling, I have to say.
I think that's well put.
As a non-book seller, I don't work in books, so when you said 80% of your stock is, what did you call that?
Backlist.
Backlist. And in total, what would you say is on a list at any one time at City Lights? Like, what's like the order of magnitude? Like, is it 10,000 books, or I can't even.
So at any given time at City Lights, we'll have about 24 to 26,000 titles.
Mm-hmm.
In our database, we have about 200,000 handpicked active titles that we've selected over the years. And so one of the benefits of digital technologies is that you can find a book easily that you haven't had on your shelves for 15 or 20 years, update the prices on that and bring it in. There again, we'll go back to the word trust. You can bring these, just as we've rebuilt the inventory at City Lights over, as we recovered from the pandemic, I've brought titles back in that we haven't had on the shelves for 15 years. I never saw those books because I don't go in every day. And so like, they sell quicker than I can actually get back to the store. And so it's just, the vast reservoir of really amazing books out there that none of us can simultaneously have in there. And so that's kind of our job, is to kind of be, how do we rotate these titles in there, not to get too stuck in terms of what's familiar or what's selling, and just kind of, and trust the readers that they will pick those books up even though it's less familiar.
You had a question?
Yeah, so I'm not in the book industry at all, but obviously I'm grateful for the books that we have, bookstores we have in the city, and I'm just wondering, as like two different generations of book buyers, like what does thinking about the customer look like? Because I love the curated shelves that I see, like I love seeing the one for spring, and obviously all the curated shelves that happen downstairs. But what does it look like when you like have these relationships with the reps, but also like how are you thinking about people who, you know, you don't know their names and sometimes it's just based off numbers? I'm just curious about that.
For us, it's just, come back to the word trust, is that if we really feel strongly about a book, that we trust it that somebody's going to be very excited to find that book. And it's like Vanessa was kind of talking a little bit earlier, that how excited we get about a customer who finds something. So I'm not in the store all that often, but I can see because I look at every sale every day, just every night, and so it's I can tell that somebody just bought 6 books of HD, and just in kind of. I know we made somebody really happy because those books aren't anywhere else, and it just.
I'd say sometimes it's a lot less thought than you might think. Sometimes it's like, okay, it's June. Let's get some gay ass books on the Pride display. Excuse my French. A lot of times it's you have a staff member who's excited about a particular thing, and they know a bunch of books that they want to put together, and you let them. You're like, yeah, you make a display. Follow your passion. If you love seaweed, let's make a seaweed display. Sometimes it's as simple as that, and sometimes there is a lot of thought that goes into certain things. I remember in my time at City Lights, there was a section called Black Radical Imagination that was the subject of a lot of thought and careful putting together. And then at Green Apple, it can be as on the fly as it's Halloween. Let's put some horror books and a couple shelves together. And it's always exciting to see the public respond to that. It means a lot, even if it's whether it's something that you're kind of doing together in the back room laughing about, let's put these books together, that'd be funny, or having a serious discussion. Thank you so much, everybody. You've been amazing. It's been really an honor to be here with all of you. And Paul will be glad to sign your copies. Please buy some.
Yes.
We get one more hand for Paul Yamazaki. This was a true joy. Thank you so much. Vanessa, did you imagine when you got hired at City Lights that you would be sitting here talking to Paul about...
No. Can I also get a hand for Car Johnson, please?
Yes.
Can I also get a hand for the staff at Books on the Park?
Thank you all so much for showing up and showing out. You are all truly wonderful stars of human beings, and I'm very grateful for each and every one of you, and for everyone who tuned in online. Thank you so much for joining us. You are
online.
Yeah. I hope you didn't say anything that you regret.
My memory doesn't last that long.
I'm just here to say, one, my tremendous gratitude to all of you. Two, Paul, I'm going to have you at the back desk to sign books, where my colleague Emily is, where my friend Emily is, and Nick right there. Oh, they stood up. Sorry, I didn't know you were there. Well, if you need to know where to go, I'll gladly tell you. And if not, copies are at the front. You can find them there. Paul's going to sign back here, and we'll see you next time. Thank you so much.
Thanks for going. Thank you so much.